what's going to happen is that because the big vendors now, like Nokia and Ericsson, have had to bow to OpenRAN demands. They can't. They can kick up a fuss about it and say, it doesn't work as well, and it's not. It doesn't measure up, and it's not energy efficient, and all of this stuff. But if their customers are telling them that this is what they want, then they face obsolescence, don't they, in the future, unless they.
We've got to try and at least meet them halfway.
Yeah, so and that's why I think they've realised that there's no point in resisting it.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. Don't know what happened to my throat there. Shall I start again?
Normally you come on.
Hello
and welcome
to. Normally I come on and do what?
Do a funny impression.
What, straight away?
Yeah, it's become a theme recently.
Right, well that was an impression of a rank amateur. No, I'm not going to do it again because you don't expect perfection from me, do you? Unquestioningly adoring audience. What's going on? This is going to be our penultimate one of the year, isn't it?
Yep.
And we're doing it early, and we're doing it on a Thursday because we're going out for lunch with a friend of the pod, Richard Fogg, after, and then we're going out with our colleagues to tie one on. So it could get messy, and we'll see how it goes. And we might as well mention it now. We've got a bribe of the week, and I've even brought the bribe of the week in, and it was from Virgin Media O2, and they gave us a G&T kit. So this bottle of Giga Gin.
They've started making their own gin.
They started making their own gin. It's reference. Our last segment, we're going to be talking about this, but it's called Giga Gin because they have upgraded the Virgin network to gigabit speed for the whole of its network.
It's like the Tesla tequila.
But not fibre.
But not fibre, which has been one of the things that we chat about. And it came with instructions, so it came with this bottle of Giga Gin, a couple of these fever trees, although I don't know if they're going to account for the whole gin. So I bought in cheeky Schweppes from home.
Fever tree is tonic for foreign audience.
Yeah, it's fever tree is tonic. Yeah, not some drug. And then on the instructions it said you got to put these hibiscus flowers in, and apparently they make it go a funny colour. So shall I just do one now?
It's not going to turn purple, is it?
I think it probably will. So
I'm scared with your laptop.
This is like a science experiment during the pod.
There's a bit of gin. There's a bit of tonic. I know. Yeah, I feel
this is all filmed, is it?
Open University science dude.
All right, go on, blow it up, Scott.
We mixed the hibiscus flowers.
This will be the last pod ever because something will explode in a minute.
And it made
Are you supposed to eat them or you just like have them in your...
It made it look fucking weird.
Oh, it's like potpourri.
Yeah, it's like, they're basically they're probably having a laugh. They're going, I bet Scott does that in front of camera and makes a complete fool of himself. And now you're supposed to stir it around. I haven't got a stirrer. Look, it's going...
Oh, it is going purple.
Can't say fairer than that. So here we go, ladies and gentlemen. A purple G&T, thanks to Virgin Media O2. Thanks a lot for that. Go for it, mate.
Okay, thanks very much. Right, making my own gin and tonic. What is it supposed to be? A third gin to...
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just using up this tonic.
I can't even tell how much gin's in there at the moment, really.
Yeah.
Do a nice third of it.
Right. Okay, so...
This is breakfast because I haven't even eaten this morning.
I've had a handful of dry roasted peanuts, so that's my stomach lined.
Ugh. Oh, my God.
Breakfast of kings. That's about it. Oh, we should probably reflect on the state of the pandemic, shouldn't we? So, Ian, a couple of weeks ago, you were calling me Eeyore-ish and downbeat and stuff. Is that still what you think?
Well, I was wrong saying there wouldn't be any restrictions.
Right.
I can sort of live with the ones they've announced because I don't think they're too onerous. It's just basically wearing face masks, isn't it?
Slippery fucking
I
slope.
think they'll come in January is what I think is going to happen. I don't think anything will happen before Christmas. I still don't think they'll go, you can't go and see your relatives or you can't go into a pub anymore.
So the interesting thing...
there's a danger of that in January. Yeah.
I'm not going to bang on about it too long. Yeah, that's kind of what they did last year as well, didn't they? They sort of dicked about with Christmas then they really put the hammer down in January.
Not to go and stay with their families last year.
Exactly, so we got this for our
whilst they were dad dancing in Downing Street.
Exactly.
Good alliteration there.
there.
No one was vaccinated back then.
Yeah, well, no, I mean-
some 90-year-olds were.
I
Just.
I completely disagree with any lockdownage, but anyway, but yes, it is interesting that this story about them having a party which no one else was allowed to have
That's pretty good.
about a year ago. Yeah, it's slipping down all right, isn't it? Slipping down worryingly well for a G&T just after midday. I just think it's interesting that leak that's been doing the rounds in the news in the UK coincided with them predictably, as I predicted 2 weeks ago, starting to incrementally sort of lock down our civil liberties.
Yeah.
And
No, you were right. I was wrong, but I'm still optimistic there's not going to be anything more before Christmas because I don't think the data will show anything more before Christmas, really.
Oh, sweet, naive child. Do you think they're driven by the data and not just blind political
Well, I think
considerations?
the data they've got so far says it's more transmissible, and that's what's led them to do this. But in terms of hospitalisations and deaths, I don't think they'll learn anything until after Christmas. So.
Yeah, and if they were doing it on the data, but I think if you look back, I think there's a loose association with data and them doing stuff. But anyway, maybe.
And I also don't think most people are going to pay any attention to these ones anyway.
Well, that's what interests me more, especially with this story that came out. I just wonder whether more and more people are just going to think, hold on a sec, they're taking the piss.
Yeah, and especially if they say something like you can't go and stay with other households at Christmas, people will just go fuck off this year. I guarantee it.
I think so.
After what happened last year, after revelations of all this Downing Street partying.
I think so. So I think these will be interesting times.
And it's bullshit anyway. I mean, not being able to spend. This is 2 years now we're into this. Not being able to go and spend Christmas with your family. I mean, if you're in your 70s or 80s, you might only have about 3 Christmases left anyway. That's the one time of the year you go and see your family. Don't do it because you might catch.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the logic's just
the opportunity cost of all this, and then
let people make their own decisions about
all the
it.
people. And we've had a few press events that have been cancelled at the last minute because everyone started shitting themselves again. The ancillary costs, and they talk about untreated cancer and mental health and blah blah blah. There's so many knock-on things, and
I think we're on the same wavelength on this one.
Well, it's just that we're a year further down the line.
Yeah,
I think last year most people, even I, sort of prickly and libertarian though I am, was just like, all right, we don't really know what's going on here. It looks a bit dodgy. I'll go along with it. But a year later, nah, man. I mean, are they going to do it again next year?
Well, probably because there's going to be another variant by then,
Exactly.
isn't there?
Anyway, that's not what this pod's about. What were you going to say?
No, I cycled past Parliament yesterday, and there were people outside shouting, protesting at the police who were just behind the gates, like.
Right.
It's all quite calm here, though, isn't it, compared to like Central Europe and the Netherlands?
Yeah, it
and
was
Austria,
just a few
where it
people.
really,
Well,
it's
but
really
they've
kicked
started
off.
doing things like mandating vaccines in Central Europe.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a different order of
Do
magnitude.
you know the one of the most? This is really off topic of Telecom
Yeah, I know.
now, but
We'll
one
get to the point
of
in a
the
minute.
most worrying things about which is on the BBC website, and I didn't catch this in the press conference. I didn't watch most of it, but apparently they said something about considering booster shots being introduced into the vaccine passport scheme, which suggests that now they're going to start saying
Shifting the goalposts.
it's not enough just to have a vaccine passport that shows you've
Yeah,
had 2
yeah.
shots.
This is
You need to have one every 6 months, otherwise you're not up to date.
We're a 3-dose venue.
And the trouble with doing that is that then you're always disenfranchising a group of... Because there's always going to be people waiting for the vaccine. Even if they want to get a booster, there are always going to be people waiting to have it done. So you're always going to be cutting a section of society out of being able to do things. Like
100%.
just go into a sports venue or
100%. That's why
something.
we're sort of
Absolutely outrageous.
libertarian purists like me have been saying this for ages. As soon as you make previously unconditional civil liberties conditional, it's a slippery slope. I know slippery slopes... God, you made short work of that, Pierre.
It wasn't very strong.
I know the slippery slope can be used as a fallacy, but it does also exist. If you start saying, all right, you can't go to the shops unless you have a vaccine now, then you've set the precedent of you can't do this unless that later.
Yeah.
And,
or having the right type of vaccine, which I think they tried doing at a Bruce
correct.
Springsteen concert. If you'd had Pfizer, you're okay, but you weren't allowed in with AstraZeneca.
I know, it's just so arbitrary.
What?
Yeah.
I mean,
That happened a few months ago, didn't
happened.
it?
I don't
That
like
actually happened.
Springsteen anyway.
That
but
actually
I have-
happened.
I mean, I don't
Boosters
care
is as bad, I think, as that. The booster, the idea of having boosters on the vaccine passport, because people who are in their 20s will be always waiting to have a booster longer than anybody else.
Yeah.
So it's like saying if you're in your 70s, you can go on holiday this year, but you probably can't because you haven't had the booster yet. And it's not just what
Can
we
you
do; it's Europe implementing this as well, because they've already shown that they're quite happy to be Nazis about this sort of thing.
Can you imagine if they made nightclubs only 3-dose spaces, and then it's all like old people?
Yeah.
no young people allowed.
So old gits on the pull.
Yeah.
Yes, that sounds like a normal night out for me. Anyway, only joking, love. So yes, okay, we should get back to the point. One more thing we got to say: we've got a new addition to the team here. I finally got a deputy editor. We finally got a new Jamie, Andrew Wood. And you can't see him on camera, and we've gagged him, so he doesn't say. Early at this stage, he doesn't say anything.
He's not even got a microphone.
No, he hasn't got a microphone. You haven't earned a microphone yet, Andrew. But no, I mean,
Say hello.
Hello. Andrew's an experienced tech journalist, but just like I was when I first started in this job, hasn't necessarily been immersed in telecoms. So we're not going to expose him to all our arcane talk of OpenRAN and crazy shit like that just yet. So he's just watching in just to see quite what an unprofessional shit show of an operation he's signed up for.
Yeah.
And his first day was Monday, and this is Thursday. So happy fourth day, Andrew. Right. What are we going to chat about? It's going to have to be OpenRAN again, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, I was trying
OpenRAN in the UK as opposed
OpenRAN
to
in
Asia.
the UK. I know. I mean, I sort of, I don't know why I feel so apologetic about it. Like, I think we have to have a different topic. Obviously, we're journalists. We argue. We talk about what's breaking, what's interesting that week. And you and I both wrote up. There was basically a big UK government statement about how totally into OpenRAN they are.
Yeah.
Done, in my opinion, the way I editorialised it for the benefit of the Americans. So there's plenty to unpack there. So we're going to have to lead with that. And if you think we're talking about OpenRAN too much, I'm sorry, but it's called Telecoms.com podcast. You know what I mean? If you want us to talk about sport, watch the sport podcast.
If you want us to talk about the pandemic, that's all right.
That's true.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, and we reserve the right to go off on totally non-telecoms tangents as it suits us. And then I think another bugbear of ours that we haven't had a pretext to have a moan about for a little while is public cloud. Mm-hmm. We had an AWS outage this week.
Which I think we both predicted. We've both been saying one of the big clouds is going to have one at one point.
Of course.
After Fastly, Akamai, and then Facebook with its internet problems.
No technology's flawless.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth discussing the
Well, it's worth discussing the telco reaction to it, which is
do
really
you know what? I totally I put up the story. I actually wrote it up last night because we're starting early, and I just got ahead of the game. And I've embedded a couple of tweets, but then I saw your story and saw the Neil McRae tweet, and I just nicked it off you, unattributed. But I'm attributing it now.
No, it's his tweet.
It's his tweet, but I wouldn't have known about it if I hadn't read your story. But anyway, yeah. So that's all good. And I think it was him or someone was talking about redundancy, and that's the thing that intrigues me.
Yeah, and Scott Petty was talking about redundancy at a press event not that long ago. Scott Petty from Vodafone to me, but
so we'll talk about that. And I think it's only fair, seeing as we're drinking their Bribe of the Week, that we mention what the Bribe of the Week was timed to coincide with, which is Virgin Media upgrading their VMO2 as they are now.
Yeah,
their fixed line network to average speeds above 1 gigabit per second.
Woohoo! It's a shame their customer service is
That's
so
why it's called
shit.
Gigagin. Shame this customer service so shit. Luke's going to love you.
This is the best they've done on customer service.
Luke, who sent me his bribe, he's just going to love you on that one. Sorry, Luke. I mean, I think customer service is great.
Great network, shit customer service.
Okay, well, I'm sure they'll take that feedback on board, Ian. So there we go. So let's crack on. As ever, I've done all the initial rabbiting, so I'll pass the ball to you. Why don't you start by summarising this government thing to do with OpenRAN and security and sucking up to the Yanks that they did yesterday?
Yeah, I mean it's a long running theme. I mean the UK government's got a real sort of hard on for OpenRAN ever since last year, really, when it took that decision to ban
ever
Huawei.
Since the Americans told them to.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about OpenRAN becoming really politicised, and it started off in 2018 as this novel concept to try and lower costs and get some more competition into the network, and then it's increasingly been sort of tied up with, finding alternatives to Huawei and even the sort of big Nordic vendors.
Yeah, basically they banned Huawei and ZTE, and then suddenly thought, oh shit, it's a duopoly now.
Exactly, that was the genesis of it. Was I think they tried not to ban Huawei, didn't they? They tried to impose some restrictions and say you can carry on.
Well, that again is why I persist with the sucking up to the Yanks angle, because it's
come about through American pressure. Yeah. I think they just didn't, they didn't go along with the idea that Huawei should be completely banned, and the Americans basically said, well, we've got this Five Eyes partnership, and you're a key partner in that, and we sell.
If you don't want it to be Four Eyes,
we sell you military equipment, and we're not going to, and all this kind of stuff, and just leaned on them and made out. And also, this was around about the time, I think, when I mean, it probably started back when all the sort of Brexit negotiations were going on and Trump was sort of dangling the prospect of a juicy trade deal with America in front of Boris Johnson.
I mean, America, as we've seen countless times, has a unique ability to impose economic and diplomatic pressure.
Yeah. So they've basically they went along with this, banned Huawei, and then immediately thought, oh, hang on a minute, that means that we're going to, because the market's consolidated so much over the last 10, 15, 20 years, down from, I think, sort of 10 radio access network vendors at one point to really just 3 big ones today. All of a sudden, you're left with just Ericsson and Nokia as kind of scale options that aren't Chinese. And they've panicked about over reliance on these Nordic vendors, and their response to that has been to look to this fledgling technology concept, OpenRAN, which is, I mean, people will know what it is, I'm sure, who are regular pod listeners, but it's this idea that you can mix and match products better. Basically,
yeah.
you introduce more interoperable interfaces into the network, which haven't existed before. And instead of having to buy everything from one vendor's system for a given mobile site, you can sort of buy baseband equipment from one company, let's say, and get your radios from somebody else, and it should all work together.
And the analogy we often use is like assembling your own PC as opposed to buying an Apple Mac.
Totally, which is a good analogy. And the hope is that it will, I think the important thing for the UK government is they sort of hope this will spur, it's not just the UK government, but proponents say it will spur competition, partly because it allows specialists to compete where they couldn't before. If you're a company that only develops radios, and we've got this system where these interfaces make it, the lack of interoperable interfaces makes it very difficult for someone else to kind of insert themselves into the network. They've got a huge problem. They have to have a sort of end-to-end RAN offering to be able to challenge Ericsson and Nokia. So the idea is that with OpenRAN, it makes it a lot easier for component makers, software specialists, cloud platforms to all kind of slot together, and hey presto, you've suddenly got a more vibrant,
and it's hard to argue that
market.
I mean, it's great.
Let's
open it up. There's no reason, there's no sort of God-given reason why Ericsson and Nokia should have the market all to themselves.
There isn't, no.
And we're probably going to come to this, but the market, if the market doesn't like it, then the market needs to act.
Yeah, I mean, there's no God-given reason why, but we're always on about this. I think OpenRAN faces so many challenges that whether OpenRAN is actually capable of providing that alternative, we don't really know yet. I mean, it's not quite ready. I mean, there's various ways of looking at the government statement, and one is, as you were saying, it's another sign of sort of government enthusiasm for OpenRAN and them sort of going along with what the Americans want them to do. But I actually saw in the announcement a kind of backing off to some extent from. There's almost a recognition there, I think, that it's not ready yet.
Certainly with the timescales.
The timescale. I mean, they had this. So they set up this. This is the interesting thing. They set up this thing called the Telecom Diversification Task Force, or whatever it is, a few months ago. It's probably a year ago now. And the whole idea of that was to go and look at options that were not Ericsson and Nokia.
Yeah.
What could we do to get more companies into the supply chain? And they issued this report in April, and really kind of came down quite heavily in favour of OpenRAN. I think they were suggesting that they were advising the government to recommend that operators have 1/4 of their networks supplied by OpenRAN vendors, and even saying those should be alternatives to Ericsson and Nokia by the mid-2020s. And the headline really from the government announcement yesterday is this aspiration for, I think it's 35% of traffic.
I've got the story up.
To go over open and interoperable networks by 2030. Right. No mention at all. I mean, open and interoperable networks could be networks that are provided by Ericsson and Nokia.
Exactly. Because that's what they've got press release now saying that they're producing stuff on OpenRAN principles or whatever.
Basically, as long as it's compatible and as long as it ticks the right boxes, there was nothing. The interesting thing, there was nothing in that government announcement that said by 2030 you need to be using. You need to have the sort of thing they did with Huawei first time round. You can only have 33% of these weird figures they throw out. You can only have 33% of the network. There was nothing in that about alternative vendors.
And also, they stated it as this proportion of open RAN architecture by 2030 was an ambition.
It's an ambition as well. It was. So this is the other thing. They've backed off
I've got
a mandate.
ambitions.
Yeah, they've backed off a firm mandate, and the other thing is this. This one thing they did that they did sort of take quite a firm line on is this shutdown date for 2G and 3G.
Yeah.
For 2033, but 2033 is a long way away. I mean, we're talking about 12 years away.
And I thought they got it a bit arse over. I didn't get why they led with the 2G, 3G thing.
Well, I don't think they explained it very well.
No.
But the problem, and perhaps they don't want to explain it very well, but as I see it, 2G and 3G is a massive obstacle to OpenRAN because the ORAN Alliance, which is the group that's basically developing OpenRAN specifications, hasn't really considered those technologies. It's very much skewed towards 5G
people like
and
Samsung
4G.
aren't backward compatible.
Exactly, and the companies that are actually developing OpenRAN technologies, the specialists, there's not that many of them that provide support for those two technologies. I mean, 3G is a real problem in terms of OpenRAN companies actually having 3G products.
Yeah.
Less so because it's an easier technology to phase out. I mean, that's probably going to be gone in the next 2 or 3 years, I suspect.
I don't know, but I mean, it might do. But do you remember that chat we had?
Well, Vodafone seems to be
Vodafone,
suggesting it's
thinking
harder
there's
to get
plenty of old
rid.
biddies.
But I mean, 2G is the one that will be around. I think probably till 2033 and maybe even longer.
You can force upgrade people. The only way, and I got this impression when we chatted about Vodafone about it a few months ago. You can force upgrade just by having only 4G compatible phones available in the market. So then what you're left with is legacy handsets that people have been clinging onto for 10 years.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, if you wanted to force upgrade them, just give them free new handsets.
Yeah, they could do that. But the problem they have, to explain why it's difficult, it's if you don't have OpenRAN, kit vendors doing 2G and 3G stuff. By the way, the interesting thing is Nokia doesn't have 2G and 3G. You know, Nokia makes a big thing about all of our stuff's like ORAN compliant now. All of it's sort of 4G. It's not, doesn't cover 2G and 3G either. So even they admit
really, even though Nokia's been producing kit for 2G and 3G in the past.
They have 2G and 3G kit, but it's not ORAN, it's not OpenRAN compatible.
I see.
Right. And I mean, I think actually they're just being more honest than some of the companies that say we have 2G and 3G products, because it's not, there's no specifications for that. There's not OpenRAN specifications, don't exist for it. So you can open the interface and make sure it works with somebody else, but it's like an engineering job. You'd have to go through the long sort of testing process.
We'll have to ask Ware about it. That's another little personnel announcement, sort of complete tangent on Telecoms.com. But Wei, who's been on this pod a few times, who's our sort of commercial content guy, is clearing off to Nokia.
He is, yeah. Clearing off back to Nokia.
Where he last was at Nokia at least a decade or so ago.
Yeah.
So sad to see you go away, but it'd be interesting to compare notes then when we write shitty stuff about Nokia in the future. He probably won't care. Anyway, sorry.
But the... So Vodafone spelt it out quite clearly when we were at that press conference. They were saying if you don't have OpenRAN 3G or 2G products, I mean, they say that Samsung can actually support 2G, which I find interesting because Samsung only about a year and a half ago was saying it couldn't.
Yeah, and they haven't been. They weren't involved back then. That in itself is a bit curious.
Yeah. But the reason that it's a problem is that if they can't do that, they have to sort of run two networks in parallel. Basically, they need to keep the traditional stuff there,
which is obviously very expensive.
And maintain that, because everything's sort of single RAN based these days, and you have a sort of platform that will support various generations of technology. You've sort of got to keep that there if you don't have an Open RAN substitute that supports 2G and 3G.
Yeah.
Or phase out 2G and 3G.
So yes, so it is consistent. It was just weird the way they presented it.
Yeah.
Especially to the uninitiated.
Well, they just didn't, and it's probably quite complicated to explain, which is why they haven't done it. But the trouble with two networks in parallel, of course, is it's just very expensive. It's more costly to do it. So,
yeah, but I still think they got to me the fact that they led with the 2G, 3G thing, which was at least a bit distracting from what I thought the central point they were trying to make is.
Yeah.
I think just showed to me. Yeah, these are dilettantes. I mean, Nadine Dorries, who's the digital minister now, she's been in the job for about 2 minutes.
Yeah.
She's got no telecoms background whatsoever.
But I think it was aimed at industry, because I remember talking to Scott Petty about this, and one of the things he was saying was that what they want is more certainty from the government on when these technologies should be phased out, because then it gives vendors something to aim for, if you see what I mean. It gives the industry something to work towards.
Fair enough.
Like a clear date.
Okay.
And
even if it's a bit woolly, at least
I think they wanted that announcement to go out. The explanation of why it's important was, but the implication is, I mean, they've got this ambition, as you were saying, by 2030, let's have 35% of traffic going over open and interoperable networks. They're talking about a 2G shutdown by 2033. I mean, that's possibly 3 years, let's say, into 6G rollout, 2033. I just think more and more, I'm getting the impression that OpenRAN or openness, however it's going to be framed in the next sort of 6, 7, 8 years, is going to be a 6G story, really, and not a 5G story.
I was just going to say the same. And this sort of confirms it from a UK point of view.
Yeah, and this is the big problem. And I don't think this really, a lot of government ministers didn't really seem to get this at the time that the whole Huawei stuff was going on, when they were talking up OpenRAN in the first place. All the companies aren't going to wait for OpenRAN. OpenRAN isn't going to reach parity with traditional infrastructure in terms of measuring up on performance until the mid-2020s. That's Orange saying that. And actually most technology executives have that kind of view. So you can't really use it in densely populated urban communities. Yeah. And they're not going to wait until the mid-2020s before they start rolling out their 5G networks. They're doing that now. So they've already landed agreements. They've already struck deals with Nokia and Ericsson to build their 5G networks. By the time we get to 2025,
that's just
when OpenRAN is ready, will be I don't know what percentage coverage will be at, because it's being rolled out more slowly than 4G was, but we'll still have a decent swathe of the UK actually covered by that stage.
Yeah.
And this is the problem. It's just that the rollout now, it's come along too late, basically, OpenRAN, I think, for 5G to have a big impact on 5G.
Exactly.
And that's why I'm very dubious of some of these analyst forecasts, the ones that say, it's going to be 30% of RAN revenues by 2025. I just think it's way too optimistic.
I don't want to slag off analysts, but I do sometimes wonder whether they sometimes start at the conclusion and fucking work their way backwards. But anyway, and so that's why everything you said is spot on. That's why we're mainly hearing about things like small cells and other sort of semi-greenfield type of things, where you're like, fuck it, we might as well give it a go.
Yeah.
Because we haven't got anything there.
Yeah.
And then we got to give some credit, or not, depending how it turns out, to Vodafone, who are actually doing about 2,000 macro sites, aren't they? Is that right?
Vodafone's doing. Yeah, they're the only network operator that's actually made a firm commitment, and they're doing 2,500 sites. They are macro sites, mainly in rural areas in the West and
rural Wales
and Wales. Places where no one cares if it goes wrong.
The Welsh are sort of dispensable. Yeah, it doesn't matter. A few taffs haven't got the internet. But no, I mean, joking aside, that is a risk. They are sticking their neck out, and it's not like they're just doing it on a couple of sites. A few thousand sites, that's a serious financial risk. It'll be interesting to see how they report it. Obviously, we've got a good dialogue with Vodafone because of Jamie.
Yeah.
But how are we going to know how that rollout has gone? Because if it's not gone well, they're probably going to.
Well,
keep it quiet,
I'm curious as to why Vodafone wants to take the risk. Because it's how much they're going to get out of OpenRAN, really. Increasingly it seems like the cost savings argument just isn't really there. We've had pod sessions on this. This argument that it'll really lower costs and make a big difference just is not very clear. Partly because what operators spend on the radio access network, it's substantial, but there's a lot of costs you can't virtualize. You can't re-architect your network to actually get rid of some things.
Yep.
Just basic civil engineering, concrete, mast sites themselves are things that can't be virtualized away. Rent and access. They account for a huge amount of spending on the network. And you look at what goes into the RAN, it's a lot of money, but it's only actually a fairly small percentage of overall kind of telecom spending. So when you kind of bring it down to the ARPU level, and what's the difference it would make if they were going to pass, reductions onto customers, it's almost negligible. So I think the whole cost side of it's very dubious, and I think will they get benefits in terms of services? Maybe. I mean, it's possible that by being able to use specialist vendors in buildings and for small cells, as you were saying, that they might get, those tend to be opportunities that someone like Ericsson or Nokia will probably ignore because they're more focused on the big, macro market. And therefore they might get specialist vendors who are able to bring applications and bring features that they haven't been able to use in the macro network. But I'm really dubious of this whole idea about diversification, and having a more, having alternatives to Ericsson and Nokia. I just don't think the case for that is very clear. And the main issue I have with it, they seem to be very worried about over-reliance on these two Nordic vendors. Yeah, that
Yeah.
It's not it's not good to have an oligopoly. But the trouble, the logic
It's fine
to me,
to be worried about it, but you created the problem.
the logic of OpenRAN to me is dubious at best and flawed at worst. If you break the RAN market, if you break that RAN sort of sector into, let's say, 6 subsectors, baseband software, baseband hardware, radios, cloud platforms, and all the other stuff, then that doesn't mean that each one of those sub-markets is going to be extremely competitive.
Yeah.
What you might end up doing is trading a very sort of uncomfortable relationship with Ericsson, let's say, because you're too dependent on it, for numerous sort of awkward dependencies.
Exactly, and we've spoken lots of times before. God knows we covered this topic a fair bit recently. Topic? Yes, I know. I'm only on my second G&T. And just say if you need some more ice and stuff, mate.
I will.
Yeah.
I need some more gin, probably.
Yeah, well, you can finish it off. There are all sorts of other sort of supply and technology bottlenecks you can have, whether it's chips, whether it's system integrators, whatever. So it's not a panacea. I think what I find interesting. So
there's also the assumption that operators actually, there's this idea of having multi-vendor networks. And I can see something happening. We said that it might just be Ericsson and Nokia providing OpenRAN compatible kit by 2030, but nothing's really changed. Because if you talk to BT, which is admittedly more sceptical than Vodafone about OpenRAN, and you talk to Neil McRae, who's their chief architect, and we're going to mention him again a bit later, but he's
cropping up more and more these days.
He is, yeah. Partly because he's just very quotable and outspoken.
Mind getting involved.
But he would say he doesn't see a good case to actually increase the number of suppliers in the network, because if you start using more, if you have these complex multi-vendor networks where you've got lots of companies doing different things, it just becomes very hard to manage.
Yeah, and the flip side of like bundling and vendor lock-in is that presumably you get a pretty good deal off Ericsson, for example, for the whole shebang.
And you've got this, I hate the expression, but one throat to choke. If something goes wrong, you know who to blame. So you've got the alternative
that
to
one's
that.
almost as bad as What's Under the Kimono or Look Inside the Kimono. Have you ever heard that one? That's goddamn creepy.
That sounds horrible.
I first heard that from the CEO of Synchronos. And it was...
He's got no business saying things like that.
Well, it was the first time I'd interviewed him after I'd written that thing headlined "What the hell's going on at Synchronos?"
Yeah.
So it's a slightly charged interview, and it sort of dispelled the atmosphere. And he went, "I can't wait to show people what's under the kimono." And I was like, I don't think I said it, although in hindsight it would have been funny. I would have gone, "Glenn, are you trying to seduce me?" or something like that. But I did make a joke about it because it's just hilarious. But yeah, they love these really graphic metaphors in the States. But yes, one throat joke definitely does apply. At least if something goes wrong, we know it's Ericsson's fault.
Yeah, and the trouble is that at the end of Ericsson's basically a systems integrator, yeah? Maybe Nokia's a better example, because I think Ericsson, with its Ericsson Silicon unit, is responsible probably for more of the components. But Nokia certainly, which has been very transparent about its suppliers recently, because it's had to be after all of its 5G problems. They use chips from Marvell, Intel, Broadcom. They're essentially just basically taking components, bringing it all together. Those components could be sold as merchant silicon, to a radio unit vendor like Benatel in Ireland or something. And then, but at the end of the day, you need somebody who's going to do the Nokia job of slotting it all together, combining it with software, making sure it works properly, setting it on situating it.
Someone's got to do that.
Someone's got to do that job. Now,
it's not a core competence of operators.
And Ericsson and Nokia have taken a lot of responsibility for that role as the big vendor coming along and doing the job, and Huawei probably even more, sort of bring their big team of people over to sort of sort it all out for you. And so why they're so popular with small operators.
Well, Huawei always had an excellent reputation for post-sales support.
Yeah, completely. And this is one of the reasons why so many smaller operators in the US used Huawei, all these ones that are now sort of being...
Because they would just sort everything out.
Because Ericsson and Nokia weren't even very interested in those kinds of jobs.
Right.
Those smaller jobs, Huawei would sort of fly people over, build it or sort it all out. They've got a huge team of people. Something goes wrong,
Chinese dinners.
Yeah. And either the choice that an operator doing OpenRAN and it's all multi-vendor and they want it to be really diverse, like Telefonica, which is like that's the way it wants to go, is you either have to do that systems integrator job yourself, which means hiring a lot of people to do it. Hence Vodafone's plan to hire 7,000 software engineers over the next few years. He's already got 9,000, wants another 7,000 software engineers. Some of those will be doing OpenRAN systems integration. Or you've got to appoint a systems integrator like Tech Mahindra or Accenture or whoever it might be. And then all of a sudden, you've got another lock-in, basically. You've got another company that's heavily responsible for your network.
And you've got a company that ultimately can blame the kit. So let's say it's Accenture doing it, and something breaks. They go, well, don't look at me. It's that third party's rubbish kit that you told us to buy.
Yeah,
or whatever.
And they'll all have their preferred partners as well. This is the other thing. I mean, we already see these little sort of sub-ecosystems taking shape within the OpenRAN market. And the best example of that is Rakuten, which is trying to basically be a big vendor, I think. It's
trying to be a bit of everything.
It's building a network and it's trying to sell the same kind of technologies that it's used in Japan to operators in the rest of the world. And it's bought some of the companies as well, like Altiostar, for instance, which is a software company that does OpenRAN software. So, they have their preferred sort of ecosystem, within. There's no way that Rakuten, if you do a deal with Rakuten Symphony, which is the sort of bit the outward facing bit that's doing jobs for other operators, there's no way they're going to recommend that you use Mavenir or Parallel Wireless as the software company. They want you to use Altiostar, and they probably want you to use NEC, which is their radio.
So
vendor, and also
everyone has
Japanese
commercial incentives, and moving it back specifically to this government announcement, the government clearly, as do all governments, has political incentives. You got ice right next to you, by the way, mate. And that's why one of the things I do is I like to just look at press releases and decide whether or not they're bollocks. Pierre, will you chuck him that tonic? So that tonic, the tonic they gave us is this refreshingly light. That's probably got some stevia.
Can you mix tonic water?
No, it's the best.
Yeah,
it's less sugary. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say you can taste it when you have it with this full fat Schweppes. It definitely tastes sweeter.
It lets the gin shine.
Well, I quite like sweeter. So there we go. I like to just look at press releases and decide whether or not they're bollocks. And I decided this one largely was, and other reasons over and above. So you've been making the case for skepticism about OpenRAN in general under certain timescales and under certain expectations that have been attached to it. I'll stress, and I think I speak for both of us, we're not OpenRAN skeptical full stop. It's just got too much weight attached to it, too much expectation, too much political capital attached to it right now. Yeah. It'll eventually be part of the mix. I think it's a longer... Here's my prediction, is what's going to happen, is I think the ORAN Alliance, which is this operator-led group, the whole reason for that is that operators felt they were sort of losing control of technology development, and the big vendors, Ericsson, Huawei, Nokia, through the 3GPP largely, which is the big standards group that is in charge of 5G development and all this lot, they're just too influential, and the operators have sort of lost influence. Yes, and the ORAN Alliance was their attempt really to sort of seize the initiative. Well, that was that one a couple of pods ago or whenever we kind of thrashed it out, didn't we? Yeah, because you were sort of making that point that you're making now about it being a sort of alternative standards setting, or what's the other one? Well, it's not a standards group, it's a specifications body. Specification, I always fuck that one up. It's not really a standards. It's an alternative specifications. Right? Yeah. Well, I've corrected myself, calm down. They would call themselves a standards group because they want to be thought of that way, but they're not really. I always get them the wrong way around. So they just don't tick certain WTO boxes, basically. They're not, so they want a sort of parallel or a forked channel for being able to do stuff that they're not allowed to within the constraints of the standard setting body. Yeah. And that's fine. They just don't like that with the big vendors controlling the 3GPP basically, or being the sort of power brokers within the 3GPP, they sort of feel like they've lost influence and that some things have happened that they're not that happy about. And one of them is interoperability. This idea that you can mix and match, even if look, you might want to build your entire network with Samsung or whatever, but I can certainly see the attractions of having a network that Samsung supplies, and then in the future you might go, well, imagine it is this easy, It's become just plug and play, and you don't even need to go through much of a testing process. And you can say,
well, we've got this Samsung network, but actually we want to take out this particular bit and put somebody else in who's responsible for that area, and you can do that in the future. And if that's baked into the standards and it works well.
And that's obviously where they think they can save money, because then they put themselves in a stronger negotiating position over every single technology partner.
Yeah, but I don't think
Samsung, if you're not measuring up, we'll just tell you to clear
But
off.
it's probably not going to happen with 5G. And it's probably not going to happen to the ORAN Alliance. What's going to happen is that because the big vendors now, like Nokia and Ericsson, have had to bow to OpenRAN demands. They can kick up a fuss about it and say, oh, it doesn't work as well, and it's not, it doesn't measure up, and it's not energy efficient, and all of this stuff. But if their customers are telling them that this is what they want, then they face obsolescence, don't they, in the future, unless they.
They've got to try and at least meet them halfway.
Yeah. So, and that's why I think they've realised that there's no point in resisting it. They're just going to cause themselves more pain if they resist. Yeah. So Nokia's been actually.
But they're still going to keep making the case why we still reckon
they will. But
they're
going that way, and they'll both have. I mean, Nokia already said Huawei's a completely different matter, but Nokia already claims to have a sort of full set of ORAN compatible products. Ericsson not yet, but I think I think that's coming. They've taken some steps to have, they announced a RAN intelligent controller not that long ago, which we talked about. They're heavily involved in the ORAN Alliance. Both those companies are probably two of the biggest contributors, let's remember, to the ORAN Alliance. The specifications they're developing, a lot of that will come from Ericsson and Nokia. And what I think is going to happen is this stuff ends up getting taken back into the 3GPP. And when we get 6G coming along, all that openness, the idea that these interfaces like E2 and whatever it is, and CIPRI, which have tied companies into buying your radios and your baseband from Ericsson because that CIPRI interface just doesn't allow you to do anything differently. Mm-hmm. All of that will change with 6G.
Yes,
it will be totally open and it will be totally interoperable. So
I completely agree that this is further evidence that it's at 6G technology. So I'm going to reflect it back to the announcement itself and some of my coverage of it, and some of the many reasons I thought the press release was bollocks. So the announcement was headed, Digital Secretary announces new measures to boost UK telecom security ahead of first US visit on tech cooperation. So they're already framing it in a certain way.
Yeah.
And then she went, I've got the press release that they've now, since I wrote that, they've sent a little transcript of the meeting between what's her name, Doris, and or Doris, I don't know, Nadine Doris, I'm going to call her.
Just call her Doris.
Yeah. Doris, yeah, it's a good old school name. That. Why aren't more people called Doris? And she met an American, much more exotic sounding, Gina Raimondo. Gina Raimondo, she kicks some fucking ass. And and it's all just political. But it's their way of saying, of sort of gesturing a bit like that AUKUS alliance and all these other little bits and bobs. Their way of demonstrating to the rest of the world, especially China, that the US and the UK are singing from the same hymn sheet when it comes to telecoms, and that's fine. That by itself, if we treat it as purely a political announcement, that's what it is. But of course, they can't ever just admit it. That it's just political announcement. So that was their headline. In the opening paragraph, I said the opening paragraph was a study in non sequitur incoherence. Quote, 2G and 3B mobile networks will be phased out of use in the UK by 2023, and it's not will be. Again, I haven't seen any evidence that there's going to be any sanctions.
That's an ambition as well, is it?
Well, they didn't. I didn't call it an ambition, but I also didn't see what will happen if it's not.
Yeah.
Will be phased out of use in the UK by 2033.
It's a long way away, though.
It's also quite likely.
3G will go before then.
Talk about hedging your bets. It'd be like me betting that sometime in the next 4 months it might snow a bit. The chances are that stuff's going to have been gone by then.
2G I can see being around that long. And the reason is...
Because of IoT and that sort of thing.
Partly because of IoT, although I think a lot of IoT will have gone to things like NB-IoT and LTE-M by then, but whatever it's called now, they've changed it. It's not really referred to as LTE-M.
No.
But partly because it's the only global roaming option at the moment for voice.
Okay, good point. Yes, let's not forget.
That's the reason.
Let's not forget that was the last pure voice generation.
Yeah, and it's the only option you have for global roaming. That's
a really good point.
It's the same standard everywhere around the world.
So that's a really good point. So let's see what they say. And they say, as part of measures to increase the security of telecom supply chains and to support smooth transition to faster mobile networks. I just found that statement, there were just so many little bits that didn't lead to another. Why is phasing that out by 2023 going to increase security? Why is phasing that out by 2023 going to support a smooth transition? We don't need the government to support a smooth transition. The smooth transition happens because the industry decides it needs another generation to make everyone go to the shops and buy some more phones and stuff.
Well, they've decided to weigh in because they think that, telecom infrastructure is critical and there are security implications. But I mean, this is the thing we haven't talked about.
I'd just like to call it out.
Is this sort of protectionist angle here, which I think ties in with the whole Boris Johnson's government basically looking a little bit like some of the Labour governments of the 1970s in terms of being very sort of interventionist in industry. And
are you talking about like picking winners, that sort of thing?
Totally, yeah, picking winners.
Well, let's come to that actually, because then I've got Doris's quote, and she goes, "It's generic stuff. 5G technology is a really big deal." That someone's told her to say. She wouldn't know 5G if it bit her on the arse. And then she goes, quote, "Today we're announcing a further 50 million, further note."
Yeah, that'll make a difference.
Well, but it's not even further, as I'm about to demonstrate. A further 50 million to put the UK at the forefront of mobile connectivity, like it needed 50 mil for the government to do that anyway.
Yeah.
Or not.
50 million will definitely put them at the forefront.
And we're not at the forefront. I think like some parts of East Asia.
What did Nokia and Ericsson spend each year on R&D? About 9 billion, I think, combined.
And it's like, I remember, one of my most formative comedy influence was Eddie Murphy. And don't worry, everyone, I'm not going to have some of the Eddie Murphy bits that could get me fired. But I remember, I think it's his second stand-up, Raw. He was obsessed with divorce and alimony payments and how much women get paid. This is in the 80s. In a divorce. Anyway, and he was talking about this one woman who married some equivalent of Donald Trump, some oligarch, and then she sort of got a job, working, whatever. And his way of sort of satirizing it is she goes, look, I just earned $100. Put it with the rest. Now we got $50 billion and $100. Anyway, and that's sort of how I feel about the government chucking a bit of money into this pool. It's like, yeah, cheers, government. It's a drop in the ocean. And I mean,
it's not. It is a drop in the ocean. It's 250 million, I think they said altogether.
Was there some total commitment to all sorts of stuff?
Which is, on the one hand, it's not enough to actually make a difference. But on the other hand, it's like, why bother, and why are they using taxpayer money to do things like this? The telecom industry is not in trouble. These companies,
although they're constantly on the ponce.
They're always on the moan, and they've got, some of them are quite heavily indebted, and that's why we see things like tower divestments going on and moving infrastructure into the cloud.
And they don't know how to make themselves more profitable.
But they are profitable. They're not loss-making companies, and their revenues, whilst they're not growing, and they haven't sort of produced that growth story and been able to do what big tech's done, which is like they've sort of got big tech envy, haven't they? And have had it for years. They've not managed that, and they feel
left out. They've got some FOMO.
They feel like they've let their shareholders down. I think
quarterly FOMO.
Potentially see them as being able to, have that kind of story themselves. But this is what I don't get. 250 million, why can't they do that themselves?
Well, and the answer is they can. So, but leaving aside the 250 million, we've got this 50 million. And she goes on to say, so to make our telecoms network safe and secure now and in the future, full stop. New sentence. We can only do this through stronger international collaboration. What? I question that as an assumption, and I'll be meeting with her. So that's her way of sort of queuing up more sort of America, sucking up to the Yanks.
Stronger international. Anyway. It's all at odds with the whole sort of seeding UK companies and pumping money
it's incoherent.
UK startups anyway.
And in my next paragraph, I went, that 50 mil involves some inevitable creative accountant, with 36 million of it representing the culmination of something called a future RAN competition.
Oh, that's right.
For short,
yes.
Which was launched in July. Yeah. So they had announced this sum of money in July.
Yeah.
It's just that it's culminated now. So for her to call that, say, a further 50 million... when 36 million of it had been announced in July, it's just bollocks.
Yeah. I mean, I looked at that sheet of the companies and the initiatives that had received funding,
No,
and they each get sort of 3 million, 1 million
Yeah, yeah.
here, and it's like sort of seed funding for it's the sort of thing that goes on.
Although there's a lot of big blue chips involved in a lot
This
of them.
is the thing that irritates me. It's the sort of thing that goes on in Silicon Valley, where you might get someone like a company I spoke with actually this week, Cohere Technologies, or I think they're attracting a bit more investment than that. They're not sort of disclosing the details.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
you get a startup coming
They're the
along
ones
and
who
it gets some seed
involved in
funding.
sort of novel radio stuff, aren't they?
And they get some funding and they kind of go on and it's all sort of tied in with the VC community and Orange has a VC arm. Deutsche Telekom has a VC arm. I don't understand why. And Telefonica, and they're sort of going with their begging bowls to authorities and asking for,
because they know they can.
I mean, this is not just a UK thing. We had that big statement that I think we've talked about as well on the pod. We need more support for OpenRAN. The 5 big European telcos: Deutsche Telekom, Vodafone, Telecom Italia, Telefonica, and someone else, Orange.
Yeah,
writing.
I thought you said Orange already.
Maybe I did, but yeah, the big
twice.
5 anyway. They're sort of writing
Vodafone.
that letter to Vodafone, and saying we need you to sort of back OpenRAN, by which they mean, providing support for
Give us some
for
cash.
startups and cash. They actually explicitly say they want
we had
funding.
the thing
Why
last
can't
week
you
about them
fund
asking
it?
for cash off big tech as well.
Yeah,
They're
they
always on
make
the ponds.
several billion a year in net profit. Those companies, the companies in the UK alone, the big companies behind UK telecom networks, BT, Vodafone, Liberty Global, Hutchison. Who's the other one? Telefonica. They if you look at their net profits at group level, it amounts to several billion. They're not. None of them's at the moment.
But they're also not
loss-making
stupid at the
companies.
top level, and they can see political pressure to be seen to be doing stuff, and they think, well, there's some cash in that.
Yeah, I just have a big issue with governments getting involved in that sort of thing, and using taxpayer funds for something that, I mean, no one's going to. This is the thing. No one's going to care about this. Is the average taxpayer going to give a shit that 36 million is going into some OpenRAN stuff?
No.
Especially because the government would say, if they had to justify, they go, "Oh, it's all about security." You depend on telecom infrastructure these days. We have to make sure that it's not Chinese.
Of course, the average
dependent.
person doesn't do it. As I said in my headline, it's virtue signalling to the Americans.
I mean, when they're spending 100 billion on a train line that goes from London to Birmingham, then no one's going to sort of blink an eye about something like that. But the principle of it to me, when the companies that really want this and have been urging authorities to get behind it are perfectly capable of funding it themselves.
I agree. And just one more thing about this 50 mil. So 36 mil of it is this sort of lottery for a few sort of bribes to be seen to be doing something clever with OpenRAN. And then the other 15 mil is going to this thing called Sonic Labs, which is run by Ofcom.
Yeah.
So I characterise that as laundering money. Basically, we've got government money going to an organisation that's run by a government agency. And
also some of the companies involved, this is the other weird thing, is that a lot of the companies involved in these projects, they're not actually UK companies.
Yeah.
You've got Accelercom is Belgian, NEC is involved in Sonic and stuff. It's a
Cisco's
Japanese company.
involved
Why
in
does
some
NEC need taxpayer money to do OpenRAN stuff in the UK? Even
I
if it
agree.
is only $1 million, which, as I say, people just aren't going to notice. Why does it need that? NEC from Japan with it's cleaning up OpenRAN deals at the moment. It's a huge Japanese conglomerate. I don't understand why this is happening.
No, well, that's because it's all political, and this is the ultimate problem. Back to our bitch at the start about Rona lockdowns and all that sort of thing. I'm not an anarchist. I think you need some kind of government, but the last couple of years we've seen how, on the whole, give them half a chance, the government's going to arse things up. They should just be in charge of, things like mending potholes, the army, the social safety net, all that sort of thing. But this always happens that they have to poke their nose into all sorts of other things because it's politically expedient. And right now it's politically expedient for the UK to be seen to be on board with OpenRAN because the Americans are so into it for their own political reasons. Meanwhile, everyone else is just getting on with it. Yeah. At least in the, I suppose the funny thing about it in the States as well is they haven't allowed Huawei into their main networks for years anyway. No. I know they've had this sort of the odd little rural provider.
Well, I think the US thing's interesting because I think it's similar to the UK. I think the US has seen OpenRAN as an opportunity to kind of produce an alternative to Ericsson and Nokia, and have its own homegrown kind of vendor.
Yeah.
It's protectionism.
And so you've got some people involved in the ecosystem like Mavenir, like Intel, that sort of thing.
But it's almost missing the point of what OpenRAN is. It's not supposed to throw up a big rival to Ericsson and Nokia. It's about specialist firms, and they already have all of that anyway.
There's a clue in open.
Yeah, I mean they're the Japan and America clearly are at the forefront at the moment in terms of actually having the supply chain.
Yes.
Maybe China, it's a bit more obscure. I mean, there's a lot of Chinese companies in the ORAN alliance, which is another topic entirely.
Indeed.
But it's
we covered that a fair bit.
Yeah, they're very
recently,
small. A lot of them very obscure,
stuff.
and we don't really know what's going on there. It's all a bit sort of you don't get that much information on it. But certainly,
they've got lots of X's in their name, and that throws us. For
South Korea is perhaps the other one with Samsung because they're sort of well into it and they see it as an opportunity.
But we trust them; they're all right.
It's really big.
They're nice East Asians.
Yeah. But so are the Japanese, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's NEC, Fujitsu, Samsung, and then Rakuten sort of companies, Inouye and Altistar, and then it's the US software firms like Mavenir and Parallel Wireless, and what the US also has is all the chip innovation. So companies like Marvell and Nvidia, who are the other ones, Xilinx, all these guys see an opportunity to. Who develop silicon, as I say, and they sell it to Nokia today largely, and big RAN equipment vendors. They see this opportunity to basically sell that as merchant silicon that then gets used in OpenRAN rollouts. So at the moment, OpenRAN is heavily dominated on that sort of distributed unit side of things. It's heavily dominated by Intel and the sort of x86 chip system. But that's one of the problems it has. It's just not. It's not power efficient enough. It's not ideal
exactly.
for.
But these are all considerations coming from someone who knows what they're talking about. Politicians don't know what they're talking about. Someone's whispering in there. I mean, you've got a little scoop this week, haven't you, about the NCSC getting involved in the ORAN?
Yeah, I mean, it's a almost side topic to the main government announcement.
Well,
but
it is, but I think it's relevant just to show that the NCSC is ultimately controlled by politicians.
So it's a UK security agency, basically.
Yeah,
NCSC.
but it's public sector.
Yeah,
I mean, ultimately, it's all. I mean, incentives are ultimately about patronage. Who can fire you? It's ultimately what it comes down to. We know loosely who can fire us, and thankfully they don't seem to despise our drunken dribblings on this podcast.
Yeah,
or at least they've been very tolerant of it. And if you're a public sector person, the ultimate person that can fire you is the Prime Minister. So you're still a political beast.
Yeah.
Yeah, granted, they don't necessarily act politically, but let's say the NCSC. Let's go back to that thing we were referring to with the Huawei ban, where initially the NCSC, or at least the body they contributed to, went, we reckon we can contain the perceived threat. And then a few months later, they went, no, actually, fuck it, let's just get rid of them. Yeah. I mean, that was clearly influenced by political stuff.
It was, but I think some of it came out of US sanctions against Huawei as well. I think the NCSC
but that was the excuse they gave, because they said now that they can't get hold of decent chips, that makes them more of a security threat. I'm not sure how convinced I was by that excuse at the time.
I think it's fairly compelling because once you cut them off the US supply chain, then their only option is to resort to, is to try and. I mean, for a long time they're going to be struggling really, and they've relied on stockpiles.
I don't think America gave us.
If they have to use Chinese equipment instead, let's say, it's even more obscure what's actually going into
America certainly gave them enough air
networks.
cover to get into line. Anyway, but that's my point about bringing up your scoop is...
Well, it's a mini scoop, which is that they've joined the ORAN Alliance, which is a specific, and they're the only big, as far as I'm aware,
self-effacing calling it a mini scoop.
They're the only government agency that's actually in the ORAN Alliance now.
Yeah,
and it's interesting because people have.
That's not a mini scoop; that's a proper scoop.
Okay, but out of all the sort of concerns about OpenRAN, one of them is security. Are these? I mean, the Germans I think raised this recently in a paper they did. They were saying that ORAN Alliance specifications, they were concerned that security is not baked in. You get people saying that if you're going to have a multi-vendor network, it creates more vulnerabilities because there's sort of more that can go wrong, basically. And I think it's interesting that the NCSC.
Got to be involved.
Well, they have to be involved because the UK's got such a hard-on for OpenRAN.
Yeah.
If they're positioning it as a way to have more secure networks, then it makes sense to have a government agency contributing to the specifications.
But does that signal a sort of UK political endorsement of everything that the ORAN Alliance does?
I don't think it's an endorsement, but I think it's good. I think it's a good step in a way to have the NCSC there contributing its knowledge and aware of what's going on, because they can form a proper assessment. It's quite a closed organisation, despite the name, and that's one of the reasons why it can't really regard itself as a proper standards group. It's not been very transparent in the past. The 5 founder members have veto rights. There's all sorts of things that don't qualify them as being a standards group according to the WTO, and they've made some changes in the last few weeks even. But I think it's good that you've got the NCSC involved in it now, and as you say, it's a natural move, because if the UK wants to do this, then they need to be absolutely sure that this stuff works and that it is secure.
Yes.
So it's partly observing what's going on, and it's partly contributing expertise, I'm guessing.
Okay.
All
right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I brought that up. The nuance you've attached to it is obviously very valuable. I brought it up more crudely as just another illustration of the overlap between politics and technology and this stuff.
The only other thing I was going to say, I don't know how long we got on this topic before we move on, but the only other thing I was going to say was on this whole sort of, trying to have your own ecosystem of suppliers, and there's a lot of OpenRAN, to me, to some extent, is about protectionism. I mean, I think the Japanese have seen this as an opportunity, really, to reinvigorate Fujitsu and NEC, which were companies that are really kind of, they were not prominent at all, let's be honest, in the 4G days. I mean, when that market was consolidating and we're left with Ericsson, Nokia and Huawei selling 80% of equipment around the world, I think the Japanese have sort of seen OpenRAN as an opportunity to sort of get back in there.
Yes, and that's how the Americans view it.
And the Americans have these.
They probably got Japan FOMO about the whole thing.
Well, I don't think they did, because they might have in a way, but they also have the software companies in Mavenir, JMA Wireless, Parallel Wireless. I mean, Altistar itself's US based; it's just owned by Rakuten now, and they've got all the big chip players. They've got Intel.
Yep.
They've got the ones I've just reeled off, Marvell,
Qualcomm, Marvell, AMD.
So they have. So a lot of the innovation, a lot of it's coming from Asia and the US, and it's Europe that's got FOMO. And because they don't really, apart from, so they have Ericsson. This is a weird thing. They have Ericsson and Nokia. They have these two giants in radio access networks, who are actually responsible for a lot of ORAN aligned specifications, and yet they're still really worried that they don't have an OpenRAN ecosystem, and that the whole thing's going to move to Asian and US companies, because operators are so concerned about reliance on Ericsson and Nokia. It's almost, the logic's just really odd. You can go around in circles with it for ages.
It always makes me laugh ever since Brexit, because as I've said many times before, I was a pro-Brexit person and remain so. I've got no buyer's remorse on that one. But every time we cozy up to Americans, it amuses me, because I know that antagonises the shit out of the Europeans.
Yeah.
That's just childish. Obviously, we shouldn't be looking at it in terms of competing blocks and that sort of thing. But that is how it is.
Well, the UK obviously thinks that it can, with these test beds and trials, but there's nobody very significant in the UK anymore, and that's the result of years of I mean, we used to have companies like Marconi, and I can't remember the names of the other ones.
Very English-sounding company, though.
But they used to be big UK.
You should call them like
and then they
Lloyds
got,
or something.
Ericsson bought most of that. I mean, that process of this is the daft thing to me in a way about OpenRAN, and operators running around going, "Oh no, the market's too consolidated. It's an oligopoly. We only have Ericsson and Nokia if you get rid of Huawei." For years, they bought equipment off Huawei that contributed to other vendors consolidating and going out of business.
I see what you mean.
And then nobody raised any objections when some of the recent rounds of consolidation were going on. When Nokia bought Alcatel-Lucent for 17 billion in 2016, and the European Commission did its big, long, in-depth paper on that particular deal, not a single operator raised objections, and several of them actually said they thought it would improve competition.
Yes,
and now they're saying, "Oh, we don't like the fact that there's only 3 big suppliers." And why are they so worried about this? I'm providing you with your segue here. When they're not worried about the public cloud to the same extent, it seems.
Very good.
Or a lot of them aren't.
I agree. And so, in conclusion on that, and then I will take your generous segue and run with it. It's just to reiterate what I said a minute ago. I think there's no place for the public sector in this stuff. It's too complicated. They haven't got the expert knowledge. They haven't got the brains. They haven't got just the core competence to get their head around it, and they should just stay the fuck out.
I
of course
think
they won't.
In a world where TSMC, the world's biggest sort of contract chip maker, is basically threatened by Chinese invasion, and where AWS has outages, a Nordic duopoly in the RAN market is the last thing that anybody should fear.
Well, there we go. And a quick shout out. I'm not going to read out his quote, but our mate John Strand got in touch, and I put some quote from him, and he was actually, by his standards, sort of his skepticism was quite tempered. He's often more strident, but he was very measured. But he was just like going, look, it's nice to. He's basically going, it's nice to see an acknowledgement that OpenRAN's not going to be a big deal in the short term, and that's fine. I think we got that there. I think the politicians would like it to be a big deal in the short term. I think they would need to demonstrate that they're all over it. And then the industry listens to all that and goes, yeah, whatever, shut the fuck up. And they're going to just get on with doing their thing. All right. So, yeah, your segue, public cloud. So, obviously, it's well documented on this podcast what our concerns about the public cloud. We even had the world's biggest public cloud evangelist, and we're still using her excellent Yeti cooler to this very day. And an interesting thing to reflect on the Danielle Royston podcast, which our podcast, when we have guests on, they're obviously never set up to be adversarial. This is just meant to be a chat.
Yeah.
But I thought that one had the potential to be adversarial more than others.
More adversarial than
well,
other
just
ones
because coming in, we'd been very sceptical about public cloud. She's very pro public cloud, so the potential for rhetorical conflict was there.
Yeah.
But in the end, she sort of ended up conceding our points that, yes, we are asking everyone to put all their eggs in one basket, but what fucking choice have you got was mainly her counter-argument, which I thought was surprisingly honest of her.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean she's wrong, and it doesn't mean, and to reiterate, that public cloud doesn't have all sorts of unique advantages that people can't do just by running their own private server-y, cloudy scenario. So none of my criticisms, and I suspect yours, of public cloud ever discount all the pluses. We're just saying, why isn't anyone talking about the minuses, the negatives as well?
Yeah.
And so this week we had an illustration, a classic illustration of negatives, completely playing into our narrative, where AWS, the biggest public cloud provider, Amazon Web Services, had an outage in the east coast of the US. And among the digital services that didn't work for a bit were Netflix, Disney Plus, Ticketmaster, Robinhood, and Coinbase.
Yeah, they're not small companies, some of those.
Yeah, so you've got two of the biggest subscription video on demand people. You've got one of the biggest ticket events people.
I think the Ticketmaster.
Yeah,
it's probably the leader.
Yeah.
Well, apparently people couldn't buy tickets for an Adele concert and were in a flap, and apparently some household appliances weren't working as well.
Well, there we go.
To the internet.
And then we got Robinhood, which
I think is really sort of science fiction movie-like. Yeah.
Robinhood's like a retail stock trading thing. And imagine if you're someone like I use free trade. Imagine if one day I'd sort of had a bright idea that I need to buy a bunch of Acme widgets, and then I couldn't get into it.
Yeah,
I'd be losing my shit, wouldn't I? Because I suddenly think I'm Gordon Gekko here.
Well, no one's come out with that I've seen with a kind of figure for this comes after a sequence of outages this year. The first one being Fastly, I think, that was widely reported. Then Akamai had similar problems, and then Facebook, which isn't a cloud company like them. It's not an edge. What do they call it? It's not a CDN or anything either. But it had server problems that affected its own services.
But it's not CDN, but a hell of a lot of, especially SMEs, run their businesses. Yeah, I mean,
its thing was big because I think globally
platform.
People couldn't use its website or Instagram or WhatsApp for a while.
And it's one thing people not being able to share pictures of their cats falling off a wall. It's another thing if you're running your whole business.
Totally,
on the
platform. And no one did a good estimate when. I mean, I certainly didn't, but I didn't see anybody else doing a sort of good estimate of what the economic cost of you know when you get those snow days in the UK. When it almost seems old-fashioned now that we've got coronavirus. No one talks about it.
We're so used to everything grinding to a halt.
When the kids don't go to school and your dad's at home for the day and he's normally at the office. And then the next day in the paper in the Daily Telegraph it goes, economic cost of this.
That's right. And they
winter
pull some number out their arse.
They pull some $1 billion number out their arse. And it's like, it seems quaint nowadays. But I kind of wonder what the Facebook outage and this AWS one, which sounds kind of worse in a way because it affects a lot of companies that use the AWS public cloud. Obviously, what it amounts to, but I've not seen anything.
Yeah, well,
do that.
maybe it's a bit early, and as we've just said, those numbers tend to be pulled out of orifices that aren't necessarily dedicated to those.
It's how
sorts
you
of
measure it,
calculations.
isn't it? So,
but yeah, and then and AWS, as you would expect, did a good job of sort of getting on top of it. But it was still nearly a full working day's worth of
it was. I think
outage.
the original message on their dashboard, when I noticed they didn't provide any kind of
press release or
apology. I mean, the Facebook and Fastly and Akamai ones are all accompanied by press releases and sort of apologies to customers on Twitter. Was AWS? I looked around, I couldn't see anything apart from this weird dashboard page that looks like something that geeks use. Almost looks like a bit of programming.
And
also,
I noticed, actually, talking about the dashboard, because I noticed that. Here's about the only explanation on the dashboard. The root cause of this issue is an impairment of several network devices.
Yeah,
so that's
I
not
know.
very fucking helpful.
I know, and when I wrote my story up, I was like, no one really knows what went wrong. Because the Facebook one, it seems, was due to human error, that they kind of, from talking to people about it,
someone
it seems like someone
unplugged
did something
the wrong server.
Tripped over a cable.
I'm not technical enough to know what the issue was, but someone fucked up basically, and that's what caused this outage that they had. But no one's really sort of explained the AWS one very well. The root cause,
least of all Amazon.
Amazon, yeah.
So yes, and then so. The point is, and there's in the story I wrote, I sort of embedded a few tweets, including one that I only embedded once I read your coverage of it. But the first one I embedded was from a congresswoman called Katie Porter. So that's like their equivalent of MPs, isn't it? Congress people.
I don't know.
And then they got senators, which is their equivalent of lords, but they're not. But it's democratic.
Really,
it's not hereditary. Anyway, they got their two houses like we got.
The senators are the ones that seem to become presidents, no? Or
I think
does
so.
it really matter,
I think that's often the route, isn't it?
I don't know.
I think that's usually the route. There's a more sort of clear...
Either that or you need to be on The Apprentice.
The Apprentice. You just need to be the world's biggest gobshite.
Or a movie star.
And then you could be president. Anyway, Katie Porter, who may or may not be a gobshite, I don't know, it's the first I've heard of her. She tweeted, she goes, "System failures like these threaten the stability of our economy. Amazon Web Services controls 33% of the cloud services market, and all banks use the cloud. We need more federal oversight of cloud service providers to keep our financial system secure." So she chose to focus on financial sector. Some other...
Her figure's interesting because what she doesn't make, 33%, you think, oh, that doesn't sound too bad. What she hasn't pointed out is that if you add Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud in, it comes up to about 2/3 of the whole market, and then the rest of it's a bit fragmented in Chinese. So it's... And then the big problem is moving between them, which I think I wrote about in my story.
We've spoken about before.
I think
it's not so simple.
The best company that's laid out how difficult that is for me is Snap, which is the company behind Snapchat, where if you go through their filings with the SEC, they basically go, we've got some stuff on Google and we've got some stuff on AWS, and there's no redundancy. We can't really move things across very easily. It's an absolute nightmare. I mean, they didn't put it in this way, obviously, but that's essentially what they said. And
when you're a public company, you have to put risks.
And if anything goes wrong, we're completely screwed. And they're also contracted to spend about $3.1 billion on those two companies over a 5-year period, which is huge compared to
with our
what
previous
they
chat
earn.
about OpenRAN. I mean, there's not that much of incentive for the likes of AWS to not hike their prices up arbitrarily. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
You're all in on AWS. Let's say you're Dish.
Yeah.
You're all in on AWS, and they just go, well, don't know, it's been a tough year. We're going to need another 10% out of you. What are you going to do about it?
What they've done in the cloud companies is they've basically weakened loads of other companies, like bricks and mortar retailers, through online competition and everything.
Yeah.
They've enfeebled them.
So you mean like Amazon, Amazon has done that?
Yeah.
And then AWS
has come along and gone, oh, hang on a minute, we can help you to be more efficient and save costs because you can stick all your back office systems in our cloud, and then you'll be a bit more efficient at least.
So that was my conclusion, like my concluding paragraph. Oh yeah, and I'm just going to flag up the thing that I got off you. There's two other tweets I put. Some other person, I don't know who they are, called Harry Kunzru. Anyway, I just like their tweet. They just went, because apparently some Amazon delivery services. Presumably, delivery drivers operate on quite a sort of Uberish way. Yeah. And they're constantly reliant on their phones to work out where they're dropping shit off. And so this person went, deliveries and Netflix, that's more or less the entire US pandemic economy, which I thought was funny.
Yeah, that is good.
And then we had Neil McRae, who we mentioned earlier, who's the chief techie at BT/EE, said...
his tweet's classic.
Yeah, well, he said in reply to... So his original tweet, he's replying to his original tweet, which said... hold on. Okay, I've got that. So he said, still want to put your... And when was this original tweet?
Well, the original tweet was before the outage.
Yeah,
this is the weird thing. So I don't know why he was posting the original tweet.
Well, I think he was just saying, I told you so. So the original tweet is December the 2nd.
Yeah.
And so the original tweet said, still want to put your network on the public cloud, #suckers, which I thought was funny. And then in reply to that one, dated 8th of December, so it's only 6 days later, but yes, before and after the AWS thing, he goes, hope the folks at AWS fix their big problem and relight their big candle. In the meantime, I'll refer you to this, referring to his old tweet.
Well, I think that's massive, I mean, that's a massive story. The chief architect, an operator, and there's a trend at the moment, this is one of the things we talked about a lot, for companies to move their cloud, their core, at least the core or part of it, or think about moving that into the public cloud and running network functions from there and moving IT workloads there as well. And then you've got the chief architect, a European incumbent, coming out and saying, haha, suckers,
this seems
for
to be
doing
bollocks.
that. I mean, that
he's
for a start...
He's not pulling his punches, is he?
I mean, for a start, if BT ever does a cloud deal, a public cloud deal in the future, or its core goes in, I mean, everybody's going to have to be asking them, well, hang on a minute. Your chief architect went suckers for companies doing that, which obviously pointed to the risks of what can go wrong. And... I mean, I sense a bigger backlash, actually, I think, against this sort of thing at the moment. I remember talking to, we mentioned him earlier, but Scott Petty at Vodafone, who's very senior there as well, he's Chief Digital Officer, at a dinner that we were both at. And I was lucky enough to sit next to him. And I was chatting to him about the companies that have really gone all in with AWS in America are Dish, which has basically decided it's going to run all of its IT functions and all of its network functions from the AWS cloud. It's very, very dramatic, but what you got to remember is Dish is a greenfield player, doesn't have any customers at the moment.
And you can see why for them it might seem like the most efficient way of getting up to speed.
You're building it up from scratch. And then AT&T, which is the one that Scott Petty remarked on, which is going to run its 5G core from Microsoft Azure. And I said to him, well, what do you think about that? And he said it's just too risky.
AT&T's always been one of the most techie. I remember at CES in Vegas, they used to have a whole day of an AT&T developer conference or some shit like that. They were always really hands-on techie themselves.
Yeah. But him saying it's too risky, again, it implies Vodafone would never consider doing something so extreme. And this is the thing about, I mean, we mentioned their plan to get 7,000.
Petty hasn't tweeted it, so he can probably
He's
write
not
it back.
Tweeted it.
He can
he only said it to me, but I've already written it. So. But this whole plan about getting 7,000 software engineers, and you were privy to this as well, and part of it's about, they talked about this telecom as a service platform they want to develop, which they say will allow them to be less dependent on one public cloud. So if they do put stuff into, the idea is if they do put stuff into AWS and run it there, they'd be able to, with their own kind of software tooling, they'd be able to port that to Microsoft Azure in the future if they wanted. They wouldn't have the same kind of problems that Snap's obviously having.
Yeah. Or no, not that Snap's having, but that it feels compelled to note it could have.
Well, it notes that it's very dependent, and they don't want that kind of dependency, basically. And they think that this investment in software is going to prevent that. I mean, I think so if we had Daniel Royston sitting here now, she'd say, well, in doing that, you're not. There's a trade-off, basically. If you do that, you don't realise the full benefits of the cloud provider you pick. You've got to either be all in, or you've got to go this route and have this investment that means you don't realise the full savings, basically, because you're having to invest in these software tools. So there's this sort of trade-off decision. I was just going to say, I just think it's really interesting that companies at large. I mean, I applaud this kind of thing as somebody who's really worried about the dominance of US big tech and the public clouds. I think that and telecom going into that as well, which is, as we've said, critical infrastructure. Anything that goes wrong with telecom networks these days is is economically devastating to everybody
and politically strategic. And
and so I think any efforts at all to try and find alternatives, to try and make porting easier, to try and bring new options into the market is to be encouraged personally.
Yes. So there's a word, and then I'm going to move it on because we're starting to run out of time. I don't want to keep Foggy waiting for lunch. Although he is going to turn up to a colleague, so he's not just going to have to stare at his phone like a loser if we're a bit late. Is redundancy.
Yeah.
The word redundancy. So in my concluding paragraph, I'll just read it out as I sometimes do. I said, outages happen, and AWS seems to do a pretty good job of keeping them to a minimum. I mean, this is the first big one that we can think of.
It's the first one. I mean, we've been saying when's one of the big public clouds going to have one. So,
and I said, but this incident serves as yet another reminder of how dependent the whole digital economy is on just a few public cloud hyperscalers. And then I go on to say that genie's already out of the bottle in so much as the dependency's already there. So it's hard to know what to do about it, but perhaps if they were better regulated, they would at least be forced to build more redundancy into their systems and offer more protection for the rest of the digital world. So there's two key points there. So the redundancy, and I don't know, there probably is loads of redundancy. I don't know dick about what happened, but then they haven't exactly been that transparent either. But you'd like to think that if something went wrong in, what was it called, US East 1, that there should be some redundancy it can fall back on. Yeah. Like an emergency generator to have a metaphor.
It's still the same company, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's this thing about, big companies can't possibly collapse. AWS, no one can possibly conceive of AWS ever going out of business because it's worth 1.8 trillion on the stock market.
Yeah.
But Lehman Brothers, I mean, we've seen. You cannot say that any company's too big to run into problems.
No, I take that point. But at least within that, given that the reason this happened wasn't because AWS went out of business.
No.
You'd like to think that there would be more fail-safes built in, and maybe there were. Maybe this is really exceptional. Maybe this went through about 3 or 4 fail-safes before fucking up.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think the best fail-safe is for companies for there to be more competition and companies not being so dependent.
Yeah, so that gets into the regulation, which is an interesting one. When you get, I'm quite a sort of pro-free market, libertarian, laissez-faire kind of guy. But Adam Smith...
This is Standard Oil stuff, this.
Yeah, well, I've said this loads of times on the pod before. Adam Smith, in the late 1700s, wrote in Wealth of Nations about how if you get people of the same trade talking to each other, they'll probably conspire to fuck over the public, to paraphrase Adam on that one.
I think he wrote it that way, actually.
I think those were his words. And he wrote it as Scottish accent. He's going to fuck the bastards over.
So it's like reading Trainspotting back in the 18th century.
It's like Begbie writing economics. And so that was his way of saying you need regulation. People are always a completely unfettered, unmonitored free market is going to tend towards cartels and monopolies and all that sort of thing. So telecoms, as we know, is heavily regulated, and rightly so, because the barriers to entry are so high. I really think, and it's hard to know how to do it retrospectively, because telecoms will have been regulated at the point of national monopolies becoming private.
Yeah.
How do you retrospectively regulate these 3 big cloud providers that dominate the non-Chinese global economy?
Yeah.
But I think it's got to be done.
Yeah, I mean, the EU's trying to do it with this Gaia X initiative, isn't it? This sort of system for...
That's right. Well, that was just a thing about that today.
Gaia X is their attempt to have a kind of data infrastructure set up for Europe, rather than not and obviously not be reliant on the US public clouds, and to have data sovereignty and all this kind of thing. But I mean, I'm always dubious about anything that's a sort of EU project, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So we've just spent the big chunk of this podcast agonising about the public sector poking its nose into it, and then here I am going, we need more regulation. So there's a bit of contradiction built into that.
Like sort of champions on the kind of industry side, like Deutsche Telekom's CEO Timotheus Hertges is he talked up Gaia X not that long ago, a few weeks ago on an analyst call, and said, it's a possibility to get, to give us a kind of stronger position in the edge than we've had, but as I say, I'm just sort of dubious about anything that involves the EU. And
all right,
one other thing I'd say is in terms of how quickly the public cloud market's grown, because I think people don't realise that it's really sort of it's ridiculous. I mean, I looked at the numbers. If you look at what AWS was making back in 2013, it's about 3.1 billion, I think, annual revenues. 3.1.
Right.
Last year was 46 billion.
Good God.
Yeah.
It's almost as big
So in
growth
a
as
period when
pharma companies have had this year.
Barack Obama was in the White House, it was like this sort of fairly big, but by no means the biggest bit of Amazon, an interesting opportunity. All of a sudden, it's worth sort of 46 billion, and then you've got Microsoft and Google obviously there as well.
Yeah. So then you get the dilemma, and I'm going to move it on here because we've got like 5-10 minutes left. Sadly.
Well, it's just talking about gin.
Is when you've got companies that are as big as governments.
Yeah.
What can governments do? But the EU shows all the time. I slag off the EU, but where the EU is good and where I am all in favour of the EU, when they decide to fuck with a big company, ultimately they're showing who wears the trousers.
At least they fine sensibly. They impose fines that are actually going to hurt these companies rather than what the UK does,
and put proper sanctions like we'll kick you out of the whole continent if you take the piss, type of thing. Anyway, let's move on to the final thing. So we've just done this gig of gin. It's gone down well.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit worried about how well it's gone down, given that we're just at the start of a big day on the lash. I might have to drink some water.
I can see why you're not coming out tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. But then we're about to have lunch with the person who runs the agency who's trying to get me out tomorrow. So there we go. That's right, isn't it? I've got that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's still trying to get you out tomorrow.
No, they haven't for a while. They gave up on me. But the point is I can sort of blame him if anyone goes, why didn't you come out? Anyway, so yeah, thanks again, VMO2, as I call them now, because that's our.
That seems to be how they're referring to themselves, though.
Yeah, well, it's the obvious abbreviation.
Yeah, it sounds like something off the periodical table or whatever.
BT never caught on. I quite liked BT, but no one's ever run with that. But VMO2. So the reason they sent that thing is they did a weird little press release a few weeks ago, going, "We're nearly here," and I always think we're nearly about to do something. Press release is quite funny, but then I wrote it up, so more fool me.
Yeah.
What that says about the amount of competing news on that day is another matter. And now they've finally got there. And so they've updated their whole UK fixed line network to what they claim is an average speed of in excess, or a potential average speed, if you pay for it, in excess of a gigabit per second.
Yeah.
Which is a load better. They say it's something like 22 times faster than the national average, which I think is a good achievement. But it is something that is quite constrained by time, because what they've done I think is by updating sort of a lot of is it cable? I'm gonna hand over to you here, because light reading, I know it's not necessarily something you write about every day, but I'm really shit on fixed line on the whole. But updating the technology to Docsis 3.1, and that's sort of a cable rather than necessarily a fibre technology. Is that right?
It's cable. They've taken advantage of Docsis improvements, I think, to get up to like gigabit speeds. But
there we go.
But
so they're good for now.
They're good for now, and it's good for the immediate future actually as well. If they can, I mean, I don't know what it's going to work out at on a sort of per home basis, because these figures get thrown out and they're often not what people are actually seeing. But
I would say every time I write it up, they say the average speed of 1.1 gig. I'd be interested to know whether someone, because it costs like at least entry level, it costs £62 a month to sign up for this shit.
Yeah.
So it's not cheap. I don't know what you guys think off the top of your head, if you can remember what you pay for your broadband. Mine's like half that.
Mine's probably 30 or 40
exactly.
or something.
Yeah, 35.
The thing that they wouldn't have mentioned in this announcement is that they've actually decided to abandon Docsis.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I missed that. So how does that work then? If they're crowing about Docsis and they're abandoning it?
They have no interest in Docsis in the long term. By 2028, their plan is to have a full fibre to the home network.
Full FTTH.
Yeah. Like BT.
Okay, I hear you. So it is consistent with my editorialising it, which is an interim short-term win.
Yeah, and they came out with this announcement quite a long time ago. It was months ago, but they basically said that the step ups to Docsis 4 and whatever and beyond that, there was more benefit to actually going to fibre to the home, and they could do it quite economically as well.
But I mean, no one's ever doubted. Remember, we used to talk about G-Fast and stuff. I mean, no one's ever doubted that.
Yeah, but you're comparing it then to a copper network. You're sort of saying that fibre to the home network is better than BT's ADSL, copper-based ADSL network.
But fibre to home is always better than everything else, isn't it?
I think, well, exactly, and that's what. And I think that the point is that the step-up path that you get with fibre to they reckon they can do it economically enough because they have the ducts and they have the infrastructure to be able to run the fibre out, and so they've come out with their economic case for it. And if you look at the pathway, I guess the future pathway for that technology, it just appeals to them more than going along that Docsis route, it seems. So they will eventually become, in the late 2020s,
but my
another
point is, in the short
provider.
term, right now, their marketing people can go, if you want gigabit, which is what's written on that gin.
Yeah.
If you want gigabit per second, then we're the only ones. But there's a narrow window for them. There is,
and
OpenRAN
also
will catch up.
Yeah, and it's whether people care enough. This is the problem. I mean,
well, that's a really good. Good point.
BT's
would you pay?
BT's
would you double your
with,
broadband thing just to get that bandwidth?
No,
yourself?
I mean the UK market's really odd at the moment. You've got BT sort of working really hard to get fibre out to 25 million premises or whatever it is by the mid 2020s, and spending a lot of money to do it because it sees all this competition coming along from people like City Fibre and Hyperoptic and the people I'm meeting tomorrow, probably. I don't know what their involvement is in residential. Actually, probably not that much. But and it's just
if everything goes according to plan, you're not going to give a shit what they say about anything.
Their concern clearly is, and they've been lent on by the government as well. And their concern is if they don't make the investments, if they're resistant to making the investments, which they had been under previous management, they've tried to sweat that copper asset for as long as they can. Then there's going to come a point where they'll lose market share, and they'll sort of be a much smaller company than they are now. So they have to kind of put the money into the ground. But I just don't think people really care that much about. I mean, I'm a BT customer, and I think I'm on about 70 megabits a second or something on my FTTC connection, fibre to the cabinet with then a copper loop to the home. And I mean, my kids watch. I'm often sitting on the sofa at night with my gin and tonic in hand, watching some crap on Netflix. And Alex is sitting next to me gaming or something on his tablet.
And everyone's still
and I got the other one in his bedroom doing homework and needing to be online as well. Everybody's doing their thing, and there's never still really any problems.
And so, do you suddenly need to go from 70 to 1,000?
I think this is the thing, is that in the future, probably yes. I mean, I used to be one of these people who went, there's not really a case. There's not really a case for building fibre networks because ADSL is good enough, and obviously it isn't anymore. And I think
we see you onto whatever dirty sites you were trying to dial
you see
up.
Things coming along, the
metaverse,
gaming. I mean that word that he just used, which is horrible. But I do see. I'm less sceptical of that view that applications are coming that will put enormous pressure on fixed line networks, and we've already seen this with. Was it Mark Alera at BT's consumer division whinging this last week? Was it when they had? We talked about it, didn't we, on the podcast? Yeah. They had all the football stuff showing,
and I go,
and all of a sudden, things start to slow down a bit, and you run into problems. And then you can imagine things coming along. I don't know what it might be, some kind of virtual AR reality, metaverse type stuff in the household by 2026, 2027, that'll just make today's networks look not good enough. So if you've got fibre in the ground, you've got an upgrade path through things like. Help me out here. XGS PON and 25G, 25G PON, 50G PON.
No XGS PON,
whatever it might be. So, but
all right, we're running out of time. I'm going to wrap it up. I think you've made exactly the right point about demand. I suppose if I'd be devil's advocate, I would say that some people are seduced by numbers. Like, you go and buy a Hoover or a computer or whatever, and they go, well, this one's a million watts, and that one's only
I think you're right. There are people,
and
who
so maybe
swayed.
there'll be some people who go, a gig, damn, that looks good. I'm going to future-proof my ass and buy this.
It's a marketing opportunity, but it's how well they can do that and also overcome their crappy reputation for customer service,
which you don't miss an opportunity to stress. My dad's a VM customer. I think he's had his ups and downs. But yeah, good luck to him. I mean, I understand the strategy. They're like, right now, if we can develop a sort of install base, a client base of people who associate us with the fastest speeds right now, and most people don't think about FTTH and shit, they just think about numbers. then maybe we can hang on to them for a bit, even once OpenReach starts to overtake us, because their FTTH rollout is eventually going to be much more extensive than Virgin's.
Yeah. Well, this is the problem for Virgin. It's not nationwide.
I think I understand the strategy. I think that's where they get the budget to chuck a bit of gin, although you didn't get one, which I thought
I didn't. And I'm in touch with like their PR all the time. I don't know
what's going on, Luke. Why doesn't Ian get any gin?
Where's my gin?
But anyway, we should wrap it up there because we've got a big day ahead of us. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. Thanks a lot for watching, and make sure you join us for the last one of the year next week.